Revealed. The incredible story of a janitor who transformed a billion-dollar equation in 30 days. Joe Thompson swept the floor of the high-tech research lab, his worn-out sneakers gliding silently across the pristine tiles. The glow of the monitor screens bathed him in an ethereal light, casting shadows that danced like his memories, flickering and fading yet always present. Each brush of the broom felt heavier, punctuated with thoughts of the struggles facing his son, Josh, whose dreams of engineering now hung by the thinnest thread. Yet, with a smile plastered on his face, Joe hid the raw pain of his loss, each stroke a testament to his resolve to build a better life for Josh. As he emptied the trash, his gaze landed on a chalkboard covered in frenetic calculations, symbols twisting into one giant puzzle that had confounded the university's finest minds. It was an equation that represented a billion-dollar breakthrough, the kind of problem that could change lives and cement names into history. Desperation clawed at him. Could he, a janitor, hold the answer? He felt an impossible weight of his family's hopes pressing against his chest, and his heart raced as panic threatened to snatch the breath from his lungs. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was tasked with cleaning their mess, while standing on the precipice of opportunity. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As weeks turned into nights spent scribbling notes amongst mops and buckets, Joe's mind raced with complex math and buried worries. He bore witness to the dismissive attitudes of the elite, their haughty laughter ringing in his ears as they discussed theories he could barely comprehend. With every equation he puzzled over, hope flickered like a candle fighting against the encroaching darkness, but the odds felt insurmountable. Who would take the word of a janitor seriously? Memories of his late wife's gentle encouragement haunted him, whispering for him to persist. He battled against tides of insecurity, feeling like a ghost in a world of brilliance, wondering if any of it mattered. Uncertainty gnawed at Joe. What if he failed? The thought of Josh abandoning his dreams consumed him. With every doubt that surfaced, the shadows around his life grew darker. Just when it seemed like he teetered on the brink of something remarkable, silence fell like a heavy cloak over his revelations. The weight of judgment loomed, threatening this fragile facade he had built for his son, where pride and success could thrive. The foreboding moment arrived, a summons to face the university's academic board. His heart hammered in his chest as he stepped into the room, rich wood panels and polished silver surrounding him, symbols of power and privilege that contrasted starkly with his own existence. In trembling hands, he held pages of his work, the culmination of long nights and quiet battles waged against both the equation and his own self-doubt. But what if this was where it all fell apart? Could a simple janitor stand before the elite and redefine respect? The silence deepened around him, the stakes climbing higher. Joe steeled himself, his mind a whirlwind of fear and determination. Would he muster the courage to unveil his answer? Or would this moment slip away, a subordinate caught in the snare of a story never told? The weight of possibility pressed down on him, the air thick with tension, as he prepared to step into uncertainty where every breath carried the promise of either hope or heartbreak. Joe's pulse quickened as he stood before the academic board, each member's scrutinizing gaze a weight heavy enough to crush his resolve. The stark contrast between their polished professionalism and his humble work uniform was a reminder of a chasm that stretched far beyond their immediate surroundings. His sweaty palms clutched papers that could either validate his worth or dismiss him as just another invisible cog in the machine. With every breath he took, the gravity of his choice clawed at him. This moment could shatter or solidify his son's dreams. He poised himself at the head of the table, an eldest soldier ready to face the enemy. As he opened his mouth to speak, he felt the echo of every mocking laugh he had overheard in the lab. What does he know? They sneered when they thought no one but their peers were listening. The question he had, a simple one really, what if he knew more than they could imagine? This was his moment to not just claim a space at the table, but to rebuild its very foundation. With a deep breath he began. The words flowed like water breaking through a dam as he explained his findings, revealing a simplicity hidden within the complexity of the equation. He stood firm, rising from the shadows of his self-doubt. As his confidence weaved through the technical language of numbers and symbols, he started to tone down the academic jargon, consciously drawing parallels between his life experiences and the equations he had unraveled. It was a risky strategy, opening himself up instead of hiding behind the shield of equations. Every problem has an answer, he stated, looking directly into the eyes of the skeptic nearest him. Just like every person has a story. He pressed on, explaining each calculation and its implications not only for future research but for everyday lives. The equations represented choices, paths taken or forsaken, much like his own journey. But their expressions remained neutral, a blank canvas layer draped over skepticism. Doubt flickered again, a gnarled specter that threatened to crush him. Would they dismiss the emotional undercurrents woven through his analysis? The thought surged, buoyed by the need to prevail as he felt the weight of Josh's hopes behind him. The image of his son studying late into the night with dreams of one day becoming an engineer filled Joe with renewed vigor. He concluded with a plea hidden beneath the mathematics, the desperation of a father longing for his son's hope. Finally, silence enveloped the room once again. Joe's heart hammered as he watched them exchange glances filled with astonishment he couldn't decipher. Had he gone too far? Had he exposed himself in ways that could be damaging? As whispers brewed amongst the board members, one of them, a woman with sharp eyes, leaned forward. "This is unconventional, Mr. Thompson," she said slowly, measuring each word. "But there might be merit in your perspective. Are you suggesting that our approach has been limiting?" Joe felt a flicker of realization surge through him. This was his moment of breakthrough, a revelation not just for him but potentially for the entire institution. "I believe that we often overlook the simplicity within a problem, in our pursuit for complexity," he responded, emboldened. "I've seen it in my life. Sometimes the answer is a matter of perspective." With this new thread of hope blooming within him, Joe couldn't ignore how this was also about himself reclaiming authority over his narrative, becoming more than just a janitor who cleaned the mess of others. He was a voice with the power to challenge perceptions. As the board members began to deliberate, the tension coiling tighter, Joe understood that their decision could alter the trajectory of his life. His fate was now tightly woven into their evaluations, offering a fraying thread of suspense. Would they see past the surface? Was this the dawn of a new chapter for him and Josh? Or merely a step deeper into the abyss of forgotten dreams? The room hung heavy with anticipation, and as he waited for their verdict, another question clawed at the edge of his thoughts. Would he have the courage to step beyond the walls that confined him, to advocate not just for himself but for those like him? The answer could redefine everything. The moment stretched, palpable and thick, as the academic board murmured in low tones, their expressions inscrutable. Time felt elastic, warping the seconds into an eternity. Joe felt as if he were the last man standing in a battlefield, and yet for the first time he could sense a shift in the atmosphere. The weight of their scrutiny began to dissipate, replaced by a nascent curiosity. Did they see him? Did they actually notice him standing there, as a man, not merely a janitor? The skepticism he had grown accustomed to started to morph into something more subtle: interest, perhaps even respect. Was it possible that he had pulled them in with his unusual approach? Joe's thoughts spiraled, illuminating paths he had previously never dared to explore. What if he did belong here? A small flame of hope flickered in the depths of his chest. Each board member's deliberation felt like a heartbeat, resonating with his own racing pulse. He took a mental step back, allowing himself the space to breathe. He couldn't lose this moment. In the aftermath of his presentation, Joe felt empowered yet vulnerable. His ambition had ignited something within him. He never knew existed, a determination to reshape not only his own narrative, but also to extend that possibility to others tethered to labels. The daydream of being more than a cleaner started to crystallize, stirring the depths of his ambitions. This belief shivered beneath the surface of his reality, and that vibration thrummed louder as he visualized his son, eyes bright with dreams, who needed to see his father claim his worth. As the members began to speak again, Joe caught part of their conversation. "This has significant implications if tested further," one remarked, while another responded, "But we must tread carefully. It defies our existing paradigm." Instinctively, Joe leaned forward, again finding his voice. It's exactly that our existing paradigm that's the issue. We're so entrenched in the belief that complexity reigns supreme that we neglect the solutions found in simplicity. Science isn't just equations. It's about understanding the world through the lens of human experience. That matters. The singularity of his conviction grew stronger. He was no longer just a mere participant in their world. His words echoed within him, cementing his role a catalyst for change. He could feel the collective gaze of the board members shift, an inclination toward acceptance shimmering at the edges of their skepticism. This wasn't the moment for humility. He needed to champion his ideas with vigor. Yet, a question still haunted him. At what cost would this redefinition come? Was he prepared to confront not just the potential for acceptance, but also the backlash against the long-standing authority? The stakes layered themselves thickly, and he knew he was not quite out of the woods. As the deliberation continued, he sensed a gathering storm not of doubt, but of possibility. He thought of Josh, of the boy who believed he could reach for the stars. Would Joe's success ripple out, inspiring his son to carve his path unrestrained? His heart tightened with resolve. And then, as if foretelling his own fate, one of the board members looked directly at him. "Mr. Thompson," she declared, "there's a compelling case here. However, if we entertain your perspective, it will not come without its challenges. Are you prepared to stand firm against the potential backlash? This could challenge everything we know." Her question pierced him, an invitation wrapped in caution. Joe inhaled deeply. It was as if he were finally invited into a dance he had long been taught to believe he didn't have the right to attend. "I will," he stated firmly, the conviction burning in his chest. For once, he felt he was in control, ready to advocate for a new narrative, even if it meant risking the very stability he had fought to maintain. They nodded, a mix of uncertainty and intrigue hanging in the air. Joe wouldn't just be a voice in their discussions. He would lead their conversations from the shadows into the light. But one thought lingered. Could he withstand the forces that might rise against him, even from those who should believe in him the most? The answer would soon reveal itself. For the journey he had embarked upon was not merely about equations, it was an exodus into the unknown. And that, he understood, was the risk he was willing to face. As the board members prepared to deliver their verdict, the question reverberated through him once more, intertwining with a glimmer of anticipation. What door would they choose to open for him? Would acceptance usher in a new path or merely lead to confrontation? The tension in the boardroom shifted as the chairwoman cleared her throat, readying herself to speak. Joe's heart pounded, each beat echoing the challenge he had accepted. "We appreciate your compelling argument, Mr. Thompson," she began, her tone measured yet revealing. "We'd like to proceed to the next phase, but the path ahead, as you've acknowledged, is fraught with complexities." Complexities? Joe's mind raced with the possibilities that lay ahead. He envisioned rousing discussions, fierce debates, challenges, and victories. However, alongside that surge of excitement came a tightening knot of anxiety deep within him. He knew that navigating this new path was not just confronting resistance from external forces, but also mustering the strength to silence the nagging self-doubt that had been his lifelong companion. Was he equipped for this? The question haunted him as each board member spun a vision of what the project could become. Some seemed hopeful, while others weighed the potential risk with caution. Every glance in his direction reminded him that he now stood on a precipice. He was no longer invisible. He was the center of attention. "Mr. Thompson, how do you propose we communicate your findings to the larger community? Embracing this new perspective will necessitate a shift in traditional teaching methods." Another member chimed in, eyes probing. Joe took a breath, his mind rapidly whirling through strategies he had never considered before. "We can start with pilot programs within our classrooms, allowing educators to implement simplified scientific concepts that engage students at a personal level. We can gather feedback to monitor impact, making necessary adjustments in real time." As he outlined his thoughts, he realized that he was no longer merely responding. He was actively shaping the discussion. The board members nodded, and he felt a sense of camaraderie forming. They were all in this together, an unconventional alliance poised to share a new vision with the world. Yet, with each idea proposed, the specter of doubt lurked closer. What if they rejected his suggestions? What if he faltered under scrutiny, slipping back into the shadows? He remembered Josh's face, those wide, believing eyes, and hesitated momentarily. Mr. Thompson, the chairwoman interjected, pulling him from his reverie. We must consider how we will address those who strongly adhere to the conventional methods. There will be pushback and we need a strategy for handling that. Joe felt the gravity of her words, the apprehension swirling around him. Fighting back was not just a matter of defending a theory. It was a declaration of identity. Would he muster the courage to face this challenge, especially from colleagues who should support him? Communication will be key, he replied, the words feeling heavy with responsibility. We must engage skeptics in dialogue, presenting not just data but also personal stories illustrating how this approach enhances understanding. By making it relatable, we create a bridge rather than a chasm. Where had this assertiveness come from? Joe recognized the shifting tides within himself, and he felt anchored by a purpose greater than his fear. As discussions progressed, he noted the subtle shifts in attitudes. Intrigue seemed to engulf the room, each member slowly warming to the idea of transformation. However, Joe understood that the road ahead would not be linear. He anticipated bitter confrontations with those resistant to change, and yet, for the first time, he didn't recoil from the idea of conflict. His resolve swelled. Are you aware, Mr. Thompson, asked a skeptic with a penetrating gaze, of the stakes underlying this endeavor? There are reputations at risk, and not everyone will be as receptive as your colleagues in this room. Joe's breath hitched, but he met the man's gaze steadily. I understand the risks, but what's at stake is bigger than any one of us. It's about the future of education, the future of our students. If I lose my position fighting for a cause that ignites hope, I consider that worthwhile. The words left him, raw and unguarded, and he braced himself for the impending fallout. As he spoke those final words, he felt empowered. The boardroom had transformed from a battlefield into a crucible, a place of forging resolution amid uncertainty. A flicker of respect shifted through the members, and for the first time, Joe believed they saw him as an architect of change rather than a mere participant. Yet a shadow danced at the periphery of his newfound confidence, what lay in the hearts of those who championed tradition and resisted change. The moment of uncertainty hung in the air, pregnant with possibilities. Joe knew the journey had just begun, fraught with potential victories but equally steeped in confrontation. Would he have the fortitude to navigate the turmoil that lay ahead? For now he would embrace the uncertainty and the path that challenged him the most. A chorus of decisions unfolded around him, but he couldn't shake the sense that the true battle was just starting. The next meeting loomed in his mind, a contentious figuring, a clash that could redefine not only his life but the very fabric of their academic institution. Would they be prepared for the storm he was willing to unleash? The thought lingered as he stood resolute, ready for whatever chaos lay ahead. As the days unfolded, Joe found himself wrestling with the lingering effects of that pivotal meeting. Walking through the hallways of the institution felt different now. The air seemed thicker with possibility and tension. Every familiar face he encountered embodied a silent question: would he rise or fall? The thought gnawed relentlessly at him, intertwining hope with the bitter taste of fear. He dedicated himself to preparing for the next board meeting, poring over research and case studies that illustrated successful methods of educational transformation. His desk cluttered with printouts and sticky notes, a tangible manifestation of his internal turmoil and resolve. Yet, each night as he reviewed the material, self-doubt crept in uninvited, whispering distractions that clouded his promise of change. Who do you think you are? It asked, a familiar taunt that struck at the very core of his ambition. Joe had spent years listening to that voice, but now he felt an awakening to challenge it. He wasn't merely positioning himself as an advocate. He was giving voice to an entire generation of students who deserved better. On an otherwise mundane Tuesday, a glimmer of clarity arrived unexpectedly. Joe found himself in a chance encounter with Maya, a seasoned educator known for her fierce commitment to traditional methods. They bumped into each other in the library, and Joe's heart raced. Here was an opportunity not only to discuss his ideas, but to engage in a potential confrontation that could illuminate the very doubts he battled within himself. Joe, she said, her brow furrowing with curiosity, I heard about your proposal. You're really going to challenge the way we teach? A moment of hesitation hung between them, but Joe took a deep breath and committed. Yes, Maya. I believe we should adapt and evolve. Our students are not the same as they were a decade ago. They communicate and learn differently. We can't ignore that. Maya's expression hardened briefly, and he felt the weight of her skepticism like a tangible force. Change can be dangerous, Joe. What if your idealism is misguided? There's a reason the methods have persisted this long. The word struck him like a cold wave. But what if he viewed this conversation not as a clash, but as a chance to dismantle the walls that had held him captive? But isn't our ultimate goal to maximize student engagement? We've perpetuated a cycle that breeds disinterest, especially among those who don't thrive in the traditional environment. Her eyes softened slightly, contemplating. It's not that straightforward, she replied, but Joe sensed a flicker of intrigue beneath her guarded exterior. He pressed on, knowing this might be his only chance. Maybe not, but what if we can build a hybrid model that merges our traditional roots with modern innovations? It could satisfy those who worry about losing established methods, and those who seek engagement. He watched as Maya's resolve began to waver. You make some points, Joe. But you realize you're taking a substantial risk, right? Backlash could come from within. Risk is inherent to progress, he stated, feeling something shift within him. He was no longer merely advocating for a change. He was embodying the very resolve he wished to see mirrored in his peers. As they parted ways, he felt lighter, the weight of doubt slightly lifted. The confrontation, rather than shattering him, had forged a new perspective. His voice didn't have to be solitary. By challenging traditional views directly, he was gaining allies, one hesitant conversation at a time. That night, Joe drafted a message to the board, inviting members to a forum to discuss ideas and reservations. It felt daring and yet liberating. Maybe, just maybe, engagement could stem from open dialogue instead of opposition. At the same time, he couldn't shake the thought that many adversaries were still out there. The next board meeting hung like a storm cloud over him, filled with possibilities both exhilarating and petrifying. The time had come to face the real obstacles, not just in presentation, but in the very hearts of his colleagues. How deep-rooted were their attachments to tradition, and how would they push back against him this time? As Joe hit send, he felt the foreshadowing of the tumult to come. Would his idealism hold firm against the inevitable torrents of resistance? The answer beckoned like a siren song, a chilling promise that he would soon discover just how far he was willing to go for this cause. The days leading up to the board meeting felt like a countdown to a pivotal moment in Joe's life. Each sunrise bathed his cluttered desk in a warm glow, yet he couldn't shake the chill in his spine that accompanied the thought of facing the board. He was acutely aware that he didn't just carry his own aspirations. He was now a vessel for the hopes of those students who had spent too long in neglected educational systems. Yet the thought of going against entrenched beliefs made him question his resolve. In the solitude of his office, a curious shift occurred. As he convened with himself, poring over presentations, he stumbled upon his old lecture notes. Each line he read was tinged with memories, an echo of the energetic young teacher he once was. Had he lost that fervor in the bureaucratic labyrinth that education had become? Determined to reconnect with that sense of purpose, Joe set aside the extensive data for a moment and put pen to paper. He started crafting a narrative, a story. The more he poured into it, the clearer it became. He was not just fighting for a new system. He was advocating for a new vision of education itself. The day of the meeting arrived with an oppressive weight hanging over the institution. Colleagues shuffled in and out of the conference room, their expressions ranging from resignation to skepticism. Joe stood at the entrance for a moment, absorbing the gravity of the occasion. A familiar tendril of doubt threatened to creep in, but he recognized it for what it was: an old foe trying to cloud his mission. With each beat of his heart, he reminded himself of his purpose. He wanted to create a safe space for differing opinions, where old methodologies could coexist with innovative strategies. Revising his notes, he made the pivotal decision to not only defend his proposal but to invite critique, framing it as an evolving dialogue rather than a confrontation. This awareness sparked a confidence within him, igniting an ember of passion that had long laid dormant. As the meeting commenced, Joe stood at the forefront, presenting his ideas with newfound vigor. He articulated the urgent need for adaptation in language that was both relatable and urgent. He navigated the questions with tact, emphasizing collaboration over division. To his surprise, he was met with a blend of skepticism and curiosity. Some board members leaned in as he spoke, and for the first time, he felt like a conductor leading an orchestra, harmonizing differing opinions into a collective examination of possibilities. But just as he thought he was gaining momentum, the storm of resistance arrived in the form of Aaron, an influential board member known for his strong attachment to traditional methodologies. "You stand here espousing change," Aaron challenged, "but what proof do you have that this hybrid model will yield any benefit? Isn't this merely optimism disguised as strategy?" Joe's gut tightened, intuition screaming that this was a make-or-break moment. "It is optimism, yes, but it's also backed by research and peer-reviewed studies," he countered, his voice steady despite the stakes. "More importantly, it's about asking ourselves, what have we lost in clinging to dated ways that may not serve all students?" The tension in the room thickened. Joe realized this wasn't just a clash of ideas. It was a confrontation with a mindset that had defined the institution for far too long. Something in him shifted further. Instead of retreating under Aaron's scrutiny, he leaned into the confrontation. "It's time we critically reflect on why we resist change," he went on. "Is it fear of the unknown? Or a genuine consideration for our students? I believe we owe it to them to explore what possibilities lie ahead." A few board members nodded, and the silence that followed was palpable. Joe sensed there was power in his challenge, a ripple effect igniting dialogue among the more reticent members. As the meeting drew to a close, the atmosphere crackled with unresolved tension. While the board would take time to contemplate his proposal, Joe understood the importance of that transformative moment. He had stood his ground but also opened himself to discussion and reflection. The battle was far from over, and he knew there would be repercussions, but he was no longer just an advocate. He had positioned himself as a changemaker. As he exited the room, a surge of adrenaline coursed through him, pushing back against the remnants of anxiety that loomed. This was merely the beginning, and he felt the weight of a deeper purpose rolling in. What deeper revelations and alliances awaited him around the corner? Little did he know that the encounter with the board had been the spark igniting a much larger movement within himself, and soon, he would face the true depth of his adversaries not just in thought, but in the very foundation of their beliefs. The aftermath of the board meeting lingered like an unresolved chord, vibrantly alive yet haunting. Joe had allowed his intuition to guide him, and in doing so, he discovered a newfound activism flourishing within him. As he walked through the halls of the institution, the familiar echoes of students' laughter and the shuffling of their feet reignited his earlier zeal. But he was acutely aware that this was not merely about rekindling an old flame. It was a call to arms against an establishment resisting evolution. The days that followed were filled with introspection and urgency. Joe spent evenings poring over not only educational theories, but the psychological underpinnings of resistance to change. Why was fear so intoxicating? He was puzzled but determined. Each thought was a thread, weaving a larger tapestry in his mind, a vision of a place where innovation was not barred by fear, but embraced for enhancing individual learning experiences. With purpose, he engaged more actively with his colleagues, not just in formal settings but in the casual interactions that provided rich soil for ideas to bloom. He shared stories from his lectures, anecdotes from students who thrived on inventive methods, intertwining them with data that painted a picture far more vibrant than abstract theories. Slowly, feedback emerged in the form of nods, intrigued looks, and reluctant admissions that perhaps Joe was onto something. However, the walls were thick and ingrained. Each conversation brought Joe face to face with the reality that many within the institution had invested more in maintaining their positions than in exploring educational efficacy. This realization stung, forcing him to confront the unsettling truth. Not everyone wanted progress. It was not just a challenge of implementation. It was as if an ancient ship, long weathered and barnacled, had anchored itself to its mooring, resisting all attempts to set sail into the broader horizons of educational innovation. 2 days later, a pivotal interaction awaited him. He had been summoned to a small gathering, an informal roundtable reminiscent of the debates he had once enjoyed as a vibrant educator. As he entered, he spotted Aaron at the center, flanked by a few other board members, looking every bit the steadfast gatekeeper. The atmosphere crackled with apprehension. There was a hint of hostility, and yet Joe sensed an opportunity for dialogue. "Joe," Aaron began, We appreciate your passion, but there comes a point where enthusiasm alone cannot drive our discussions. We need results. That's precisely why I'm here, Joe responded, his heart racing as he navigated this treacherous ground. I want to share approaches that have yielded positive outcomes in other districts. We need to look beyond protocols to understand what methodologies excite and engage our students. Engagement doesn't always equal success, Aaron insisted, crossing his arms. The other members exchanged glances, some appearing skeptical, others intrigued. Joe remembered his mantra: communication extended beyond just presenting facts. It was about story, context, and reaching a deeper understanding. That's fair, Aaron, but think of education as a living entity. If we ignore the elements that empower our students, we risk producing graduates that are disengaged and unprepared for their futures. He held his ground, aware he was questioning not just policies but a legacy. As the conversation unfolded, the tensions shifted. Members began to share their own misgivings: the stress of standardized testing, the struggles of unmotivated students. Joe steered the dialogue gently, drawing parallels between their experiences and the philosophies he advocated. Yet a glimmer of doubt began to weave its way through his momentum. What if he had overstepped his bounds? Would this gathering deepen his alliances or expose vulnerabilities he hadn't yet considered? The fear nagged at him, but he steadied himself under its weight. The stakes were high, and he would not back down. As the discussion wound down, Joe caught a glimpse of softened expressions and open minds. The walls were beginning to crack. It may be the first step, but he remained acutely aware that the path ahead was fraught with potential conflict. Stepping out of the space, the sun bathed him in warm light, illuminating the impending choices that loomed. He had initiated change, but what awaited him in the shadows of the institution? The urge to dig deeper into the beliefs of his colleagues propelled him forward. It was no longer just about education reform. It was emblematic of a larger personal mission against mediocrity. Little did he know the real test lay ahead, hidden just beyond reach. As he began to unravel layers of confrontation that would envelop his entire career, the age-old struggle of challenging, deeply ingrained mindsets. What future battles awaited him within the constraints of their beliefs? The following week was a crucible of tension for Joe. Each day blurred with the next, characterized by an undercurrent of determination swirling in his chest. He ventured into his daily interactions armed not just with ideas, but with an acute awareness of the psychological landscape of his colleagues. The roundtable had shifted something deeper in him. It was not only about proposing new ideas but venturing into the very roots of resistance. The boundaries he navigated felt like a fragile balancing act. He became adept at reading nonverbal cues. The rolling of eyes, a hesitant nod, the crossing of arms, each gesture told a story about adherence to tradition and fear of the unknown. Joe's growing ability to interpret these signals not only complicated his mission, but also sharpened his resolve. He was now acutely aware that the issue at hand was much larger than mere policies. It was an internal war between comfort and curiosity. And then, during one of those seemingly routine faculty meetings, he faced Linda, a veteran teacher whose entrenched skepticism stemmed from years of navigating standardized curricula. As she spoke about the need for rigid structures, Joe could feel his heart rate increase. And yet an unexpected wave of calm washed over him. This was not merely a conflict, but an opportunity to engage in deeper dialogue. Linda, he interjected, striving for a tone that was both respectful and assertive, what if we take a moment to redefine success? Consider how many bright students have fallen through the cracks simply because they didn't fit the mold we've created. What if, instead of just testing outcomes, we focused on the individual strengths of our students? The room fell silent, and he observed Linda's eyes narrow slightly, less out of hostility and more out of contemplation. A flicker of vulnerability emerged. You're saying we should change the approach, but how do we measure that? What sort of framework could we create? In that instant, Joe recognized a significant shift. She was questioning, not resisting. He dove deeper, explaining concepts of formative assessment, how feedback loops could transform the educational experience from a transactional model into a collaborative journey. A few more heads began to nod, indicating a subtle momentum building beneath the surface of skepticism. Yet, even amidst this flickering hope, doubt clawed at the edges of Joe's mind. Was this merely a momentary breakthrough or a false dawn? Each advancement seemed precarious, like constructing a tower with flimsy blocks where one misstep could send everything crashing down. Feeling the weight of this reflection, Joe's thoughts turned inward. What if his passion was mistaken for naivety? The institution had been anchored in its ways for decades, and he was merely a new player attempting to alter the game. How long could he ride the wave of initial curiosity before the tides turned against him? Deciding on a strategic move, Joe initiated an informal breakfast meeting with a small group of colleagues. Longer conversations felt needed beyond the short bursts of the staff formats. As he prepared for this intimate setting, he envisioned the methodologies he could propose, yet he was anxious to facilitate a safe space where their narratives could float freely. What lived experiences did they hold that could illuminate pathways forward? Moments before the meeting, he caught his reflection in the staff room window, a man uncertain yet resolute, the uneasy hero facing a silent battle. This wasn't merely about educational reforms. It didn't just circle around pedagogical shifts. This was a transformative moment in his career, a test of whether he could guide his peers into new realms of understanding. As he stepped into the room, an unexpected flicker of hope ignited within him. Perhaps change, though challenging, was within reach. Yet an ominous thought loomed overhead. Would he have the capacity to sustain that change against the inevitable pushback? The question sat heavy in the air as he greeted his colleagues, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. He had ignited a spark. It remained uncertain whether they would all embrace the flame. Little did Joe know, the real confrontation would soon come, not from his colleagues, but from a faction within the institution aiming to preserve the status quo at all costs. The moment for light-hearted conversation had passed. Real challenges were surfacing, and Joe was about to reach the point of no return. As the intimate breakfast meeting unfolded, Joe sat at a long rectangular table, surrounded by 5 skeptical yet curious colleagues. The aroma of fresh coffee mingled with nervous anticipation in the air. He could sense the weight of their expectations, each one mirroring the conflicts brewing beneath their professional facades. This wasn't just a meeting. It was a stage for his evolving leadership. "Thanks for coming, everyone," he began, his voice steady although his heart raced. "I wanted to create a space for us to discuss how we can better support our students by leveraging their unique strengths." He opened the floor for discussion, careful to encourage each person to voice their thoughts. They dissected their shared frustrations about rigid curricula and standardized assessments. Each candid remark was a thread in the fabric of their collective experience, revealing a rich tapestry of fear, disappointment, and beneath it all a shared yearning for meaningful change. As he listened, Joe honed in on individual stories. Linda recounted the challenges she faced with students who struggled to perform under routine examinations. Martin spoke about the disengagement he witnessed in his classroom. Their narratives became grounded in tangible issues, rather than abstract policies. Joe realized his role was shifting. No longer merely a messenger of new ideas, he was becoming a facilitator of a much larger conversation. The more they exchanged, the clearer it became. They weren't just grappling with change. They were wrestling with their own identities within this institution, their professional selves tangled in the rigid confines of tradition. "What's our biggest obstacle?" he asked, pushing for deeper introspection. Their responses varied, but one sentiment resonated across the group: the fear of failure. Joe empathized, acknowledging the tenuous balance between personal ambition and institutional loyalty that so many felt, including himself. In that moment, a realization sparked within him: these weren't just colleagues. They were allies in a shared quest for reinvention. However, as the conversation deepened, an unsettling thought crept into his mind. Was he the only one genuinely invested in this transition? What if they were only acquiescing to avoid confrontation, holding back their true concerns? The tension thickened as they approached the topic of resistance from others' faculty members. What about those who won't buy into this? Linda's question hung heavy in the air. An exploring glance exchanged between Joe and Linda revealed that the moment of truth had arrived. What if the true test lay not in implementing his ideas, but in how fiercely he could defend them against the entrenched forces of the status quo? "How do we prepare for that?" Martin chimed in, his face shadowed with doubt. Joe felt a flicker of urgency within. They were on the precipice of a critical juncture. He straightened his posture, summoning his resolve. "We need to build a coalition," he proposed, his voice stronger now. "We can present our vision collaboratively, leverage our individual strengths. If we face any opposition, it won't be just me, the LLC, it's a collective decision. As the meeting began to wind down, Joe felt a tenuous thread of determination knot in his gut. He had ignited a spark, yet the pathway ahead was veiled. Just then, a colleague's phone notification flashed, illuminating news he hadn't anticipated. A disturbing article about impending budget cuts targeting innovative programs in education. Joe's heart sank. His envisioned transformation could be stifled even before it began. The atmosphere shifted palpably from hopeful collaboration to guarded concern as they processed the implications. Joe understood that their ambitions now faced tangible challenges, and each of them would have to navigate their values in the face of this looming threat. What would it take to push through? As he observed their faces morph from excitement to uncertainty, he knew the stakes had risen. Change had become a bumpy road littered with obstacles far exceeding personal conviction. Little did Joe realize, a backlash lay brewing closer to the surface than he imagined, one that would threaten not only his aspirations, but also the fragile alliances he had painstakingly forged. The clock was ticking, and very soon, he would be forced to confront rival interests aiming to quash dissent and reinforce authority. With that heavy awareness settling over him, Joe gathered the last remaining courage within him. The time had come not just to advocate for change, but to rally support against the entrenched resistance he never saw coming. In the aftermath of the breakfast meeting, a new reality settled upon Joe. Each day passed like a ticking clock, weighing differently on his hopes and aspirations. His colleagues had shared their fears, but now, as he faced impending budget cuts, doubt began to weave through his thoughts. What if their collective vision was destined to be merely a flicker snuffed out by bureaucracy? Yet, amid the storm clouds of uncertainty, Joe felt an unyielding determination swell within him. He couldn't allow this momentum, this spark of potential, to extinguish. His mind raced with plans and ideas. He visualized what he could do to appeal not only to his colleagues but to the broader faculty and administration as well. Instead of retreating, Joe would galvanize his peers for dialogue and action. Over the next week, he meticulously organized an all-hands forum to address the critical issues at stake, not just the budget cuts, but also the innovative changes they wished to implement. The invitation went out to every faculty member, inviting them to bring their concerns, ideas, and hopes for the future of student education. If change was to take hold, it had to be a collective effort grounded in shared experiences. As he stood at the front of the room on the day of the forum, anxiety braiding itself with excitement coursed through him. Colleagues filled the space, warm bodies but cool expressions flickering with skepticism. Yet, he held their attention, an audience perched on the edge, waiting to see what this janitor-turned-advocate could deliver. Joe began by acknowledging the authentic fears they all felt as the decisions made above them threatened to undermine their aspirations. "Each of you brings a unique perspective," he said firmly. "We have the power to steer this ship, to sculpt our teaching landscape. Let us leverage our strengths and confront this challenge united, rather than succumb to fear." As he presented statistics and research supporting the value of innovative teaching methods, a wave of cautious engagement began to wash over the room. People leaned in, and faces shifted from hostility to curiosity. For the first time, Joe wasn't merely the janitor; they were seeing him as a collaborator, a peer. The discussions were invigorating, awkward at first, yet charged with a sense of urgency. He felt the shifts in understanding amidst the group, a gradual movement from skepticism to recognition. Little by little, individuals began to raise their hands, sharing their own stories of setbacks and accomplishments in the classroom, which resonated and reaffirmed his central message. Change was not only desirable but necessary. Imagine a future where our students thrive not in spite of our methods, but because of them, Joe continued, letting his passion pour into his words. Where every child is engaged, where their strengths are acknowledged and nurtured. This is our opportunity. The energy in the room crackled with newfound excitement, and Joe felt the tides turn. He saw colleagues nodding, brainstorming ideas, and suddenly the barriers they had constructed began to dissolve. This was the breakthrough he had longed for, the realization that this was not just his mission, it was theirs too. Days turned into weeks, and discussions flourished beyond that initial forum. Joe organized smaller focus groups tasked with drafting a comprehensive plan to present to the administration. He felt transformed by the collective wisdom of his colleagues, their perspectives melding with his, creating a tapestry of ideas designed to confront the issues they faced together. Finally, the day came to present their proposal to the administration. An enthusiastic group rallied behind him, ready to advocate for change, a blend of voices that represented their shared commitment to a more engaging educational model. As they entered the boardroom, Joe felt a wave of confidence wash over him. He was no longer just a janitor advocating for a shift. He was a fervent leader, ready to challenge the norms once embedded in the institution. "Thank you for meeting with us," he began, steadier than he'd ever felt. "We've crafted a proposal that reflects not only our curriculum objectives, but also the individual identities of our students. They deserve a learning experience grounded in positive engagement, adaptability, and innovation." No longer holding fear but solid conviction, Joe articulated each aspect of their plan with clarity and passion, backed by data and the narratives of their collaborative experiences. His colleagues chimed in where needed, creating a symphony of voices that underscored the urgency behind their vision. As he concluded, he could feel the momentum shift in the room. Professors who once held apprehension, even skepticism, now leaned forward, and for the first time the administration's body language began to soften. They could see beyond Joe's uniform. They were understanding him as more than a janitor, but as an integral part of their educational framework. Weeks later, the message came down. Their proposal had passed. Funding secured. Joe's heart swelled with what felt like a collective triumph as a newfound energy surged through him. The days he had spent championing change weren't just victories for his students or a personal accomplishment. They were testament to his truth that a janitor could indeed challenge the status quo. As he looked into the eyes of his son that evening, he knew he had not only reshaped his own path but had inspired a generation. Joe Thompson had conquered not just equations or bureaucratic barriers. He had emerged as a renewed man, recognized and respected, standing firmly in a world rich with promise. Reflecting on this journey, he now carried the mantle of advocacy, knowing he would always confront the complexities of education with determination, granting others permission to seek their own transformative paths. This completion, sufficiently satisfying and fulfilling, set the tone for a brighter future in education, paving the way for new narratives spun from personal and collective growth. Now, if you resonate with this incredible journey of transformation and want to see more inspiring stories, you need to subscribe now. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to witness this conclusion. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm, and comment your reactions and theories about the ending, because your voice matters in this community of personal overcoming stories.